I'm Craig Silverman. I'm a national reporter with ProPublica, which is a nonprofit investigative newsroom. And I specialize in doing digital investigations. So that's often about online disinformation, different types of media manipulation, whether that's digital advertising fraud or social media verification schemes, anything that involves kind of our information environment and the way it's been manipulated is a specialization for me. And so I report for ProPublica now and worked for BuzzFeed News in the past. In journalism, I think we kind of refer to OSINT as reporting in the most sort of fundamental way, because the job as a journalist is to, gather lots of information from different types of sources, to verify that information, to check it, and then to figure out what that tells you about the particular topic or story that you're working on, and organize that in a way to share with people. And so OSINT is a term that it's sort of caught on a little bit in journalism, but I think you have some hesitancy among journalists to actually refer to OSINT at times, because in order to get these skills spread within our profession, just calling it, digital reporting or digital investigations often resonates more with people. And so these kinds of skills are really about applying the traditional journalistic practices of verifying information to the digital environment. So dealing with, backgrounding people, all of a sudden now you need to sort of figure out their online footprint, and you maybe investigate their social media profiles or their online profiles in other places. You may be looking through corporate records that are increasingly available online. And so this idea of pulling from open sources is fundamental to the work of journalism. We're talking to people who are we're using open databases and directories. And in journalism, it's really about expanding the minds of journalists to understand that there is so much information now available across social platforms and other sources, from websites, digging into databases, whether it's, Whois and DNS information, to help journalists incorporate that into their work when they're investigating companies, people, entities, fraud, different types of schemes. So in journalism, it's kind of integrated into the work, but we're still working to get your average journalist who is not a digital specialist or a disinformation reporter to understand that they need to be applying these kinds of skills and tools and the mindset to look in digital open sources, to gather information from that and to incorporate it into the typical things we do of, talking to people, of making government records requests and those kinds of things. And so the term OSINT hasn't caught on a lot in journalism, but the skills are starting to spread, and they're starting to be used in all different types of reporting and investigations. My journey into digital investigative work and OSINT starts a while ago. I guess it's in 2004. I was a freelance journalist, just writing mostly for Canadian publications. Lived in Montreal then, still live in Canada now. And I started a blog where I looked at mistakes and corrections and fact-checking in media. And so I became kind of the corrections and verification nerd in journalism, just running this blog. And over time, I started to realize that because I was reading all of these corrections every day that were being published, and because I was doing this research in an area where nobody really was consistently, I sort of became an expert. And I became an expert in how journalists are supposed to be verifying the information we get, and also how we're supposed to behave when we get stuff wrong and be accountable for that. And that was the focus for a long time. But as we get to about 2009, 2010, 2011, social media is really starting to take off. And there's this fundamental shift where journalists were used to getting information, and then they'd have time and sort of their private space to kind of verify it. But what was happening was huge amounts of information was just by default being put out there publicly on social networks. And some of it was seemingly reliable. There's Rosie the cat making an appearance. Some of the information flowing out on social networks might have been from credible places, might have been verified. Some of it was probably in the gray area of maybe true, could be true. And some of it was clearly false. And journalists for the first time, we're having to deal with this huge amount of public information of varying degrees of credibility. And it was already out there that people were being exposed to. And so for me, the skills around verifying images and videos and claims and accounts on social media suddenly became a really big interest around 2009, 2010, because journalists suddenly had to deal with all of this public information spreading and understand how to deal with a very different information dynamic. And so I kind of shifted around that time in 2010 to basically becoming obsessed with verification of what was then called user-generated content, and how we dig into and analyze and reveal information about what's flowing out there publicly. And from that point, over the ensuing decade plus, just trying to build more and more skills and understanding, and go beyond just what's on social media, but to understand more about the entire digital information environment, the digital economy, and all of the different elements of that. So it's been a journey that's been close to 2 decades in the making, with a little more than a decade very focused on this world of digital verification and the manipulation of our information environment. My daily job is basically applying these kind of digital investigative and OSINT skills, to figure out what's really going on with people or companies, or to get behind, what's something that's going on in the news. And one recent example was I received a tip that there was a pretty large social media verification scheme being run, where people were paying, in some cases, tens of thousands of dollars to get themselves verified on Instagram. And so the initial tip came with a little bit of information about some accounts that had allegedly been sort of fraudulently verified on Instagram. And so what I had was those initial signals, that initial set, and I could see that account, and I could see that it had been verified, and I could see the content on their account. I could see the engagement levels on it. And then I could also see that this account was verified by sort of claiming to be a musician. And so from there, it was sort of like, okay, so get the full footprint of this account, understand, are they really a musician or not? And in these cases, they weren't. And then what was done to sort of convince, in this case, Meta, the owner of Instagram, that this person should be verified as a musician. And so starting from that one sort of set of information, which is one Instagram account, looked at the fact that they were linking to and highlighting a Spotify account they had, or Apple Music accounts. They were talking about the streams they had on Spotify. They were promoting articles that had been written about them and their music. And so I was able to figure out what the template was of basically creating fake musical artists in order to submit that information to Meta for verification. And so in the end, myself and another reporter, once we had identified the kind of pattern, and in particular, the record label that these artists all seem to be on, we were able, through some targeted Google searches, through other ways of kind of connecting the profiles together, to identify, in the end, what ended up being hundreds of profiles that had been fraudulently verified as musicians on Instagram and on Facebook. And to this day, Meta has removed, more than 300 of these accounts. But it starts with that one thing. Maybe it's a tip, or that one thing you notice that seems a little bit off in the environment. And then you have to figure out, is there a larger network? Are there patterns here with behavior, with content, with people involved, that you can use to build out that network? And that, to me, is kind of really a lot of the core methodology of doing this work, is having your antenna up for being able to recognize something a little anomalous in the environment, or knowing how, if you get someone's name, the different kinds of things you can do to find out about them, and then figuring out what that broader network is and the broader truth of the information and the activity that you're looking at. If you're interested in figuring out how to kind of do this work in a journalistic context, obviously some people go to journalism school and that kind of thing, but you don't need a license or necessarily a credential to do journalism or to get started on your own doing that. And one of the things that I always advocate for is getting obsessed with something. For me, I got obsessed early on with fact checking and verification and accuracy in journalism. And if you're somebody who has an obsession about a particular topic, a particular area, or you have an existing knowledge base in something, I just encourage you to go with that and to get obsessed about it to the point where you're thinking about, well, how do I get lots of information about what's going on in this area and who the key people are in this area and the latest developments in this area flowing at me? How do I, build Twitter lists? How do I set up Google alerts and maybe build a set of websites through RSS feeds or other means that I'm visiting and looking at regularly? You kind of want to start by setting up this almost sort of, multi-part dashboard of get the information flowing at you, because over time you start to understand it better, and over time you can maybe start to recognize patterns, and that's where you might identify something that's worth looking into more. And then it's really about taking these skills you might be getting from this course or other places and starting to apply them. An image or a video that strikes you as interesting, maybe you start to test and try, reverse image search or other related tools to that. A website keeps getting shared by people and it's interesting to you. So maybe you, visit it and start to analyze the content on that website. Maybe you do whois searches and other kinds of approaches to try and figure out who's behind it. The best thing that you can do is just find opportunities to practice these skills. And you don't have to do it thinking, oh, this is going to be a big investigation. It's just find something you're interested in, you're a little bit obsessed with. Think about how you stay on top of it and start to recognize patterns, and then how you use that as opportunities to start applying the skills. And you will find there's dead ends, there's stuff that seems interesting, maybe doesn't turn out to be. But at some point, if you keep doing this, you will absolutely come across something that strikes you as just a little bit off and a little bit weird and worth spending more time on. And if that's the case, talking about what you're finding, blogging about it, sharing it on social media may draw other people to you. And it may draw other journalists who want to talk to you about what you found. It may draw other researchers and folks to you. And that's a good way to start getting yourself into the community. And with journalism, you can obviously start writing up the things that you find or talking about them on a podcast and broadcasting that information out there. So sure, you could go and study journalism, and that's a great thing. There's lots of free journalism resources out there as well. But you can start doing this work without needing any kind of license or credential, and that's the best thing you can probably do. One of the most important things that I think you've got to keep in mind as you're getting into this and doing this work is that what really matters is how you think about doing this work. And it's not about how many tools you have or what programming skills you have. You will hear a lot of people in this world of digital investigations and OSINT talk about how OSINT does not equal tools, and that this is really about your mindset. And mindset, there's a saying from a hockey skills coach. So this is the cliche Canadian here. He says, mindset unlocks skill set. So if you are thinking about, ways of identifying patterns, ways of identifying anomalous activity, if you are thinking about, spending the time really reading through and scrolling through lots of social media posts or reading through as much of a website as you can, you are taking that mindset of being a little bit healthily obsessive, of being curious, of trying to be thorough of what you're seeing, and not just taking everything as it comes, but actually looking at it and pausing. That mindset is the thing that will get you through, because the tools will come and go. Stuff will stop working. New stuff will come around. You need to learn. But that mindset of your approach and thinking about how you think about the things you're doing and think about whether you are being as thorough as possible, that is the stuff that sustains people in doing this work. There's always new stuff to learn, and that can be exciting. Maybe some people find it demoralizing. But the question is, how willing are you to scroll through that 100th post, or how willing are you to, click through that 100th link or 1,000th link on a website to find that one piece that maybe connects it to something else? Because a lot of time is just that kind of brute force willingness to put in the time and the effort. And the mindset also of being aware of how this digital environment can be manipulated and having your antenna up for that. If you think about that and cultivate that mindset, the tools and other stuff will come, because it's easier to learn those. But you'll just find that you're the person who found the thing that everybody else missed because they quit. One of the things that I think does get overlooked, and it's really core to how we work as journalists, is the element of documentation and also just kind of workflow of how are you putting everything together. With journalists, you're trained to take notes and to keep those notes, and because you're going to have to talk through something with your editor, and then you're going to have to put all that together into a story. So you got to have your materials. And people who maybe aren't in the journalistic world, perhaps, they're just running through stuff and have forgot to mark it down. And so for me, I'm always trying to have a document open, whether it's an Evernote note or a Google Doc, where I'm sort of reminding myself of what I've been finding, and also often writing notes to myself of, oh yeah, I was here and then I found this, and oh, come back to this later. So that's really important. And it helps you kind of breadcrumb so you know how you got to things, because you will forget how you ended up on that particular website or that particular social media account. And for journalists, we have to maintain all that stuff because for our work product, we need it to be able to put it out. And also, frankly, for legal concerns, if you can't back up and recall and explain where you got certain information, you probably can't publish it. So I use a lot of Google Docs. I use a lot of the Evernote web clipper to save things I'm browsing. I also use a tool called Hunchly, which is a paid tool where it's a Chrome web browser extension, and it will enable you to actually capture all of the websites and pages you're visiting as you're visiting them. So you can sort of just start capturing and organizing things. And so I use a variety of tools, but I'm just constantly thinking about capturing and organizing, because I like to think about tomorrow, Craig, or next week, Craig. If I do a lousy job documenting things right now, then tomorrow, Craig, or next week, Craig, is screwed because I haven't helped him find a way to retrace or to pull together everything that I've got. So be a good friend to the future you and document things in a way that that works for you, but in a way that enables you to retrace your steps and pull up things like screenshots and other information.